Um, I'm glad that everyone has been enjoying these videos thus far. Um, Please continue to provide feedback on these videos. It is very, very helpful to us here at TLC and Wake Tech. So last video, we stopped off talking about the chemical bonds. So remember, there's two types of bonds that we focused on last time. The covalent bond, where you're sharing those electrons. Um, you can share them unequally or you can share them equally. Remember, polar bonds are going polar covalent bonds are going to be shared unequally, meaning those electrons are shared unequally. Um, the nonpolar covalent bonds, those electrons are shared equally between the atoms. So now we're going to transition and talk about cells. So I know we mentioned in the beginning about homeostasis and the body's happy place and what it means. But now let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about the actual cells. So your cells are going to be the smallest living unit in the body. Now remember, we talked about the hierarchy as it and the levels of organization as it pertains to the body. So you have the chemical, which is the very smallest. Then you got those organelles. Those organelles create or are found inside of cells. Now, it's important to remember that even though the chemical or the chemistry aspect that we just talked about with the atoms and the elements, yeah, they are the smallest. However, the smallest living unit, which means that it can function on its own, is going to be the cells. So again, your cells are the smallest living unit, living structures in the body. And everything is made up and composed of cells. This is what that cell theory states in a nutshell there. It's also important, if you're ever on Jeopardy, to remember that the person that is credited for discovering cells is a gentleman by the name of Robert Hooke. So he's credited with the discovery of cells. But let's dive into the organelles that make up this cell and the structures that are found inside of them. So remember, um, if I haven't said in the earlier videos, I'm just going to reinforce that you got your chemicals. So those are the smallest units. They come together to create those organelles that are found inside of a cell. The cell is the smallest living unit or the living structure. A group of cells that have similar function come together to create tissues. And there's four types of tissues in the body. You have epithelial tissue, you have connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscle tissue. Those are the four types of tissues found in the body. Those are created from cells that have similar function. Now, tissues that have similar function come together to create organs. And we have many organs in the body. You got your heart, your liver, your lung, your kidneys, your skin is an organ. So those again are groups of tissues that have similar function to create the organs. The organs that have similar function create the organ systems. So as you can see, we're going from very simple to very complex. The organ systems, you have your respiratory system, you have your digestive system, you have your cardiovascular and circulatory system, integumentary system. Those systems in the body are composed of organs working together or organs that have similar function to create those organ systems. Then the organ systems will come together to create the whole organism. So we just went from very simple to very complex structure or organizational level rather within the body. Now, when we look at the cell, This is just a general structure of an animal cell. So you can see that there's various components, various organelles that are found inside of the cell. The main one that most people are able to recognize from here would be the nucleus. So the nucleus, the big purple that you see there, that is going to contain the genetic information. So the DNA is going to be found inside of the nucleus that's inside of that cell. The nucleus, I also refer to it as kind of like the brain of the cell because it actually has that genetic information. So it kind of dictates what the cell can and cannot do. Um, we also have, you see the orange looking bean looking structure, that's going to be our mitochondria. We've probably heard of those before. They are referred to as the powerhouse of the cell. That just means that it creates the energy that the cell needs in order to move, in order to do its job. The cell has to have energy, and that energy is called ATP. So ATP is created within those mitochondria. Now you can see um, closer, if you look, you see the green structure. That green structure is going to be our Golgi apparatus. One good way to remember the function of this Golgi apparatus or Golgi bodies, depending on the book, is going to be they serve as the UPS or FedEx or Amazon now, right? They just package stuff up and ship it outside of the cell. Then we have our smooth and our rough ER. The smooth ER is called so because it does not have those red studs that you can see there in the blue. Those red studs on that structure in the blue, those are ribosomes. Ribosomes are important because they help with protein synthesis. That's the site of protein synthesis. So my rough endoplasmic reticulum or rough ER is going to be studded with ribosomes, which means that the rough ER is going to participate in protein synthesis. The smooth ER, if you look over to the top left, you see my smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It's going to be responsible for lipid synthesis. Then you have the lysosomes. The lysosomes are going to be referred to as the garbage disposals. So they're going to get rid of stuff or substances that the cell does not need or the cell does not want. So as you can see, there's various structures or various organelles that are found inside the cell that each play a key role in helping the cell perform its normal function. Now, remember, the cell cannot do its normal function without energy. That is going to come from the mitochondria, that ATP, and that's going to be produced by a process called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration or aerobic respiration, depending on the textbook, that's going to be the process in which ATP is going to be created to allow the cell to do its job. So again, those various organelles found inside of the cell has has many functions to keep that cell going, right? Now, when we look at, and actually, as a matter of fact, let me go back real quick. So on the outside of the cell, we have what is called a plasma membrane or a cell membrane. So you may see it interchangeable, the cell membrane or the plasma membrane of a particular cell. The key thing about that is that membrane is what we call semi-permeable or selectively permeable, which just means that it's going to be selective and allow certain things into the cell and not allow certain things out of the cell or not allow certain things into the cell. So that plasma membrane is selectively permeable, which means that it's just going to allow certain things in. So think about it. Um, I can think about, being when you're standing in line, um, in my younger days, when I used to go party, you stand in line at a club, and there's a bouncer there that allows certain number of people in, and then they hold up the line, so forth, so on. So you can think of the plasma membrane, or that cell membrane, is like the bouncers outside of a club. They are selectively allowing certain people in and not allowing certain people in, or not allowing people in or out, right? So again, that's what is the function of this plasma membrane, or the cell membrane. Now, how things move across that membrane can be by one of two transport processes. One can be what we call passive transport. The other is what we call active transport. I thought it was on the other slide. Passive transport does not require any energy to move things across that plasma membrane. Usually, when we're talking about plasma membrane, um, it is going to take things, especially with passive transport, is going to take things from a high concentration to an area of low concentration, right? Does not require any energy. Active transport, which is not on the slide, but active transport is going to require some energy. And we just mentioned that that energy is ATP, right? So let's briefly look at these three types of passive transport. The first one we call simple diffusion. That is moving from high concentration to an area of low concentration. Now, the perfect analogy, I hope, is, let's say you're driving in traffic and it's rush hour. So one lane is packed with vehicles, the other lane is not. Okay. Most people are going to move from the lane that has most vehicles, or the large amount of traffic, to the lane that does not have a lot of vehicles, or that has the least amount of traffic. So going from high to low is simple diffusion. That concentration gradient that you hear individuals talk about, or that you read in the book, just think about that as a line. That yellow line or white line on the road that you cross over to get into the next lane, that is your gradient. So those lines, whether it's dotted or the solid line, you cross that to get into the next line, to the next lane. That's just your gradient. So that line is your gradient. On one side is high, on the other side is low. So things naturally want to go from high concentration to low concentration. Simple diffusion. Another example of simple diffusion is, you ever walk into a room with a bag of Bojangles? Oh my goodness, is Bojangles gives me life, right? So you walk into a room with a bag of Bojangles chicken, and immediately the room starts to smell it, right? Or the individuals that are in the room start to smell it, or the room starts to smell like chicken. So either way, that room starts to smell like chicken because the aroma from the bag has gone from very high concentration, the bag that you have or the box, to low concentration, which is the room that you're in, right? So going from high concentration to low concentration. Facilitated diffusion. Same concept here, except facilitated means that I need someone to help me. So if I'm facilitating something, I'm helping someone do something, right? So facilitated diffusion is moving from high concentration to low concentration with the help of something, right? One example of that is glucose. Glucose is fairly large and complex, but it is needed in the body in order to create ATP. So glucose is going to pair with insulin. This insulin is going to now facilitate or help the glucose get into the cell, right? Osmosis. Now, I'm pretty sure that I'm a lot older than many of you all that are watching this, but there was a movie a long time ago called Osmosis Jones. It was an animated film that kind of taught children. I think the target audience was children, but it was trying to teach them about osmosis, right? The thing to remember here with osmosis is it has to deal with the movement of water. So water is going to go from an area of low concentration of water to an area of high concentration, right? So now let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So when we're looking at these concentrations, there are substances called, or key terms rather, that we need to be familiar with. One term is called a solute. That is the substance that is being dissolved. And one term is called the solvent, which is the substance that is doing the dissolving. So with osmosis, water is going to move from the area where there is low solute, meaning low stuff that needs to be dissolved, to an area of high solute, which means an area of high substances that needs to be dissolved. Now, the thing about water is water has this thing called FOMO. If you ever heard of the term FOMO, fear of missing out. That's what water has, and that's how I want you to think about it with osmosis. Water always wants to go where the party is. So if there's more stuff inside of the cell that needs to be dissolved, water's going to go from outside to inside because water wants to be involved. Has a fear of missing out. If there's more substances outside of the cell that needs to be dissolved, water is going to move from inside the cell to outside because, again, water has that fear of missing out. So it's always going to go where there's more stuff, more solutes that needs to be dissolved, right? So with that being said, sometimes a lot of people get confused when we talk about the high and low, because yes, water is moving from an area of high concentration of water to an area of low concentration of water. However, it is also moving from an area of low solutes to an area of high solutes, or an area of high substances that needs to be dissolved, right? That is the concept behind passive transport: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. Now, the next thing, which is not on the slide, active transport. Active transport is going to require energy to go from an area of low concentration to an area of high. So think about now, when we look at active transport, think about riding a bicycle up a hill. Well, if you're riding a bicycle up a hill, or even driving a car up a hill, right, you're going to have to put some energy into that pedal in order to move that vehicle or move that bike up that hill, right? So that is active transport. You're going to need that energy. You're going to need that ATP in order to move those substances from area of low to the area of high. One prime example, or one example of active transport that you may hear over and over again as you dive deeper into anatomy and physiology, is phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is the process of engulfing or eating a foreign substance. Well, there are certain cells in the body that we will touch on later on that actually participates and are called phagocytic cells because they actually engulf and eat foreign substances. Those cells need ATP, need energy in order to do their job, right? So passive transport does not require any energy. Active transport requires energy. The main active transport that you're going to see and deal with a lot and hear a lot is phagocytosis. The last thing that I want to talk about in this particular slide, in this particular video, is tissues. So remember, we talked about the hierarchy or the level of organization. So we started with chemistry, those organelles, then the cell. Now remember, groups of cells that have similar function create tissues. Tissues, there are four main types I mentioned earlier: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue. Epithelial tissue, let's look at those. Let's look at these four types of tissues. Epithelial tissue is going to line and protect. That's its function, line and protecting. So you're going to find that on the inside of blood vessels, lining certain organs, right? Connective tissue. Well, connective tissue is the most abundant tissue found in the body. It kind of connects or supports all of the other structures. So connective tissue is found in various parts of the body. Muscle tissue, well, muscles help you move, like Ludacris, right? Muscles, there's three types of muscles. You got skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. Now, don't get those three confused with the four types of tissue. Muscle is a type of tissue. There are three types of muscles. Nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is going to send and receive messages. Those messages are also referred to as impulses. So when you get to the nervous system, you're going to hear this word impulse over and over again, whether it's an electrical or chemical, you're going to hear the word impulse. Just remember that the impulse is a message that is sent by the nervous system to cause something to happen, right? Now, this seems like a good stopping point for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned and listen out for part 5 as we continue on with Bio 168. Thanks and have a great rest of your day.